Today is Monday, January 27th, 2025. This is Quick Start from CBN News. I'm Dan Andros. Christians are getting cut out from the foster care system. We'll have that top story and more on today's podcast, where we bring you news from a Christian perspective. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a rating. You can email us your thoughts. quickstartpodcast@cbn.org. We'd love to hear from you because we're so glad you're here with us, getting through the news of the cray, as we call it here. And joining me today, CBN's Billy Hallowell, and a lot to get to, Billy, including what I just mentioned on the focus story. What's going on with Christians in the foster care system?
Yeah, we actually are going to be talking with actress Jen Lilley. She's a foster and adoption care advocate. And in Vermont, there's some really crazy things allegedly happening with Christians not being permitted to be in the system. At least that's the claim. So we'll get into that story and why she's passionate about it.
All right, looking forward to the details there. And on the main thing, how can Christians stand firm in their convictions today? Keisha Toni Russell joins the Quick Start podcast to share insights. Make sure you're subscribed to all of our CBN News podcasts. That's DC Debrief, Billy's Newsmakers, Jesus and the Prophecies of Christmas, our 4-part series. You do not want to miss that. If you haven't checked it out yet, really edifying. All right. With that, we are going to head to the news in 90 seconds. And Colombian President Gustavo Petro reversed his stance on rejecting U.S. deportation flights from after President Trump threatened severe tariffs and sanctions, including a 25% tariff on Colombian imports and visa restrictions for Colombian officials. The White House said Petro agreed to all of Trump's terms, including accepting deported Colombian nationals via U.S. military aircraft. Trump hailed the agreement as a win for U.S. sovereignty, stating that today's events make clear to the world that America is respected again. Petro initially refused the deportation flights, calling for, quote, dignified treatment of migrants, but later offered his presidential plane for repatriation. And the Senate is moving forward with confirmation hearings for Trump's cabinet picks, with some nominees already confirmed and others facing more scrutiny in upcoming sessions. RFK Jr., who's going for Health and Human Services Director, will be going this week on Wednesday. So will Kelly Loeffler, who's up for Small Business Administration. And Thursday will be Kash Patel, who's going to be going for the FBI director spot. Those are just some of today's top headlines. Check out more stories over at cbnnews.com. Something to look out for, too. RFK Jr. has 2 appearances that he has to make. And one time he's going before the Finance Committee, which is interesting. And then also Tulsi Gabbard, who's going for Director of National Intelligence, will also be on Thursday. So big week coming up on all of these cabinet hearings. But Billy, this is interesting to see the flurry of activity that is happening here with the Trump administration and immigration, with these deportation flights. Seeing all this activity here, it makes you wonder, why couldn't some of this stuff have been done before?
Well, it could have been. I mean, I think that's the thing that you're watching here is you're watching, whether people like it or not, a president really take sort of and I'm going to use the word harsh, but I don't mean that. I mean, it's a harsh, hard approach to, hey, I'm not going to listen to what you're saying. Hey, you're not going to do that? Well, I'm going to put these restrictions on you. And you saw that reversal almost immediately happen. And I think that's the leadership that people were looking for, at least in terms of tone. You want a president, regardless of what party it's going to be, who's going to go in and say, America's my first priority, and I'm going to do whatever I have to do policy-wise to make sure that we protect our country. And so it is interesting because, all of these things that are now rapidly happening, it's like, well, yeah, why couldn't we have done this a year ago?
You think about people like Laken Riley, who died at the hands of an illegal immigrant, and you just wonder, at least, and it seems like this is a bipartisan issue, by the way, as far as the people who are criminals who are here. This seems, and I'm not saying that every person being rounded up right now is a criminal, but I think most of them are. And so it makes you wonder, why wasn't this being enforced before? And then I would imagine people like Laken Riley's family have to be both relieved hoping that nobody else has to go through what they've gone through, but also frustrated knowing that if the previous administration had just been serious about this issue, that perhaps their daughter could still be alive.
Well, and that's one of the things that keeps getting lost on people. And I find it actually pretty frustrating because I absolutely think you have to have a balance between compassion, especially when you're talking about refugees, right? Compassion and solid
Yes.
policy. You have to have that balance. But whenever anybody like that female preacher who was speaking in front of Trump, whenever anybody goes out and talks about this, they talk about compassion only for the immigrant, which again we have to have the illegal immigrant, we have to have that compassion. But what about the compassion for Laken Riley's family, the people on the border who are afraid? What about the compassion for Americans who have been bearing the brunt of illegal immigration in their border states for so long? Nobody wants to talk about that. You've got to
Mhm.
have a balanced approach to this, and I just think it's actually abysmal that nobody really thinks of those people who are also afraid and scared in dealing with this issue.
Yeah, I think you're simplifying the issue if you, in your mind, boil this thing down to compassion on only one side or the other. It's a complex issue for that reason. There are things to be compassionate about and have, sympathy for on the side of someone trying to get to this country from a worse situation, right? We can have empathy and compassion there. But you also have to have empathy and compassion, as you said, for the people here that are impacted by it. It's a two-way street. And so anybody just only pitching one side of it is kind of missing the full picture and perhaps pushing an agenda either way, because it is a complicated issue and you have to consider both. And it seems very reasonable to especially focus on criminals. And let's face it, if you're coming in, sneaking into this border, like your first act here is a criminal act. Other countries would treat that the same way, by the way. This is not something different than other countries. To go ahead and try to sneak into another country and see how it goes for you. It's not going to go well. You're going to get deported, and you're going to be accused of breaking a law, because that's what you're doing. And so we can have compassion, but we can also uphold the rule of law. And compassion is a two-way street. It's not just one side of the issue, but we'll keep you updated on everything that's going on with it. It has been a flurry of activity, that is for sure. But right now we're going to move to the focus story. And as Billy mentioned there at the top, actress Jen Lilley is speaking out about Christians and the foster care crisis. So what's she having to say? What's going on right now?
Yeah, I would encourage people, check this video out on our YouTube channel. It's almost a 40-minute conversation, and Jen Lilley's a familiar face, but pretty cool to hear her personal story of adoption and foster care. And she grew up in a Christian home and remains a very strong Christian despite having this, amazing Hollywood career. And so she talks about her story with us and all of that. But really, one of the big things that she is speaking out on is what has been going on in Vermont. The claim that Vermont has been blocking Christian families from adopting or fostering over their biblical beliefs, right? This is a story that made headlines last year. There are two families who have filed a lawsuit. That litigation is, ongoing. So the case is not settled. But basically, even earlier last year when this happened, and this is pretty bold for Lily because, again, she's on Hallmark, Great American Family. She does a lot of films and works in Hollywood, and she's been very vocal on this. She spoke out about Vermont's Department for Children and Family Services, allegedly taking these two families' licenses away. She said it was a constitutional violation. And here's what she said. Here's the quote. "This action not only violates our constitutional rights, but also jeopardizes the well-being of children in dire need of safe, loving homes. The government is deciding that it's safer for a child to remain in a dangerous and potentially life-threatening situation than to live in a home with Christian beliefs. Make it make sense." And so we had a chance to talk with her more about all of this and, really just hear her heart for why she said, "Hey, look, I'm going to speak out, even if there's a cost to it. I'm not going to be silent on what is happening in Vermont."
And she's kind of looking into officials, elected representatives, to find out more on what's going on. She did speak with a representative from Vermont. What did she say she was told?
Yeah, this is interesting because she actually reached out with another advocate she works with and spoke with a representative from the governor's office last year. And she said like she wanted to come without any preconceived notions because of course there's headlines, there's media. She wanted to understand from their perspective what might actually be going on. And she said she told this woman, she's like, look, I believe there's a seat at the table for everybody. I think as long as your home is safe, truly safe, and is providing love, safety, and stability for these children, you should have a seat at that table. And she also noted that the goal of foster care, it's not, it's not adoption. The goal of foster care is to reunite the child with the biological parents. That is the purpose
Mm.
of foster care. And she said, if the issue is that you're not going to allow Christians to foster because we don't agree with the transgender issue, well, then put those kids with a family who will affirm that if it's your fear. Like she was basically saying to them, look, if that's your biggest fear, instead of taking licenses away from these Christian families, then find a family you think is okay with it. And that wasn't her saying, she was okay with it personally. She's just like, look, that would be a better solution than pulling licenses away. She said, I just don't understand why you're saying no, Christians can't foster anymore. And she said to the woman, wouldn't you agree? And what's interesting, that representative reportedly then responded by saying that the government isn't taking any seats away from the table. She's like, that's ridiculous. But then the official apparently followed up by saying, well, hey, I don't know anybody on the side of faith, who wouldn't affirm a foster child's gender identity. So it was a very eye-opening thing for Lilley, because she's saying, like, wait a minute, you know, I'm one of those family, like I'm one of those people. So here she is talking to this woman, and she was like, well, you've put me in the hot seat. And she told the woman, I said, well, I have to back up then and just let you know that I am one of the Christians that would not stand for that. And she said the representative kind of rolled her eyes and smirked, and they ended the conversation. But she did give this woman a final message. She said, I really do hope, and this is my sincere hope, that for the sake of all children who need houses and who need safe, loving homes, that this does not impact your ability to recruit more foster parents or retain more foster parents. She's like, we're in a crisis and we don't have enough houses available. So it's almost like absurd that this is even a thing. Now, again, there's two sides to every story, but Lilley was pretty horrified hearing that and experiencing that conversation.
Yeah, and I would imagine. And in spite of that, though, she still has hope, so a little bit. So, what is her hope for Christians who have interest in adoption?
Yeah, I think her hope is, like, we gotta speak up on this. Again, that lawsuit is ongoing. She did say, like, look, she believed the official's heart was in the right place and that the person thought they were doing the right thing by the kids. She wasn't out there to slam this official, but her hope is really that Christians will step up, right? And maybe that looks like different things. Maybe she's like, look, we don't know where this issue is going to go, but maybe it looks like the church stepping in before the government, opening up their homes as safe homes. She talked about helping single moms, single dads, and families who are going through a crisis, who can't provide for their children. Just having churches kind of come in and wrap their arms around people in different ways, and so, even again, we don't know where these issues are going to go, but it is deeply concerning, the claims of what is going on. In Vermont, she's like, I really just believe every single person was created on purpose for a purpose for this exact moment in time. And she wants to reflect God and encourage other Christians to reflect God in their handling of this foster care issue.
Yeah, and look, it's interesting to me that this elected official would have that view, and it's sort of a warped view of Christianity. Like Jen was kind of shocked with that answer, like that. What? Wait a minute, you're not understanding that we have different views on the marriage and the gender issue, and to be surprised by that is kind of shocking, really. But also the fact that Christians, I would imagine, and I don't have a full study on all of these numbers, but Christians typically are more motivated to do these things. So I would imagine if you looked into the numbers, you would probably find that Christians outpace other groups on their desire to take part in the foster care system and the adoption system. So you would think this is a main constituent. If you're in the foster care industry and you're trying to help kids through the foster care system, that Christians would be one of the groups that you're listening to the most and trying to help the most, because they're one of the ones interested in what you're doing. So it's kind of surprising that that's sort of the angle that some are taking.
Yeah. Well, and we did get and I want to note this because we did get a statement from Vermont on this, and they basically said they don't comment on the specifics of pending litigation, which is not shocking. They don't
Hmm.
normally do that. But they did get it. It was a fairly lengthy statement, actually. The department prioritizes the safety of children and youth and works with the larger community to be a partner, ally, and support system rather than a barrier to children and youth who identify as part of the LGBTQI plus. We have a lot more letters there now, community. And then they went on to say, we know that a child or youth may not share their sexual orientation or gender identity, even if asked. But it kind of, like we need assurance that the foster and kin care homes have selected for our children and youth can honor these personal facets for their being. So it's interesting. They don't seem to be openly denying, that these issues are going on.
Yeah, it's really troubling, and certainly something we need to be praying about as we go forward, and as we consider and engage in these sorts of things in our own neck of the woods as well. So appreciate you talking to Jen and bringing us that story. And if you want to check out the full story, we'll have the link to that full interview in the description there below in this podcast episode. So appreciate that. And we're going to head over to the main thing now. As we mentioned there at the top, constitutional lawyer Keisha Toni Russell talked to Madison Seals about how Christians in America should be encouraged and rely on God for wisdom and boldness to live out their convictions. She wrote about that in her new book called Uncommon Courage. That conversation is today's main thing.
Keisha, first of all, congrats on the release of your new book. It's called Uncommon Courage, Defending Truth and Freedom While There Is Still Time. Can you tell me about what inspired you to write it?
Well, I was mostly inspired by the work that I do with First Liberty Institute, which is a religious liberty law firm. We defend religious Americans for free, and I've been doing that for quite a few years now, I guess at least 7 or 8. And all of the cases that I handled and the Christians that I even talked to about the cases, I was pretty surprised about how not just detached but uninformed Christians are about what's going on in America. And even more than that, how uninformed Christians are about their own rights that they're entitled to in terms of exercising their religion. So I felt like providing a book that would just be kind of a starting point for Christians who want to understand the Christian principles and foundation of our country. They want to understand the way to talk about some of these hot button issues in a biblical manner. And so I just wanted to create kind of an easy, accessible book that would provide all of that information for the kingdom of God.
Yeah, that's great. We put a lot of weight on the presidential inauguration, also called the peaceful transfer of power, which is true in the sense that the executive office can sign orders like we've seen President Trump do over the last week or so and command our military troops, among other important duties. But it's the people whose values and vote shape the turnout of these elections, just like we saw this past November. So what can we as Christians living in the United States continue to do practically to defend our freedoms?
Well, first you have to know what your freedoms are. So that means you really need to be informed. Reading my book will definitely help kind of give you a base level understanding of all of that. I think it's actually quite comprehensive, but really accessible. You don't have to be a lawyer like I am to understand what's going on. So that's the first step. You've got to know what rights you're entitled to under the Constitution, under federal law, under state law. But then the next step is to get out there and start speaking about your faith, start living out your faith. And the more you do that, the more you'll see that it's really important for you to know what rights you have, because inevitably someone will challenge you about what you're saying and what you're doing and whether you have the right to do it.
Yeah, and that's a great point that we have to know what our freedoms are in order to defend them. And, I've heard the comment before that when it comes to politics, we should leave our faith out of it and separate the two somehow. What are your thoughts on that? Is that even possible?
It's not possible because we have to live in this world. And I can't even think of too many of the most famous biblical people that didn't have to engage with the government. There are so many stories: Joseph, Jesus, David, Queen Esther. We all are going to have to face the government under some circumstances. And many of us understood that during the time of COVID, and there were vaccines and all of this thing, and we had to decide whether we wanted to do it or not. And I think that was probably one of the most fundamental moments for America, because a lot of people of faith had to decide what they believed and what they wanted to do, and whether they wanted to kind of go along with what the government was saying. And so I think ultimately it's really, really important for Christians to understand that it's going to be hard for us to live in this world and not engage with the government. It's inevitable. And you have to know how to do that in a way that comports with your Christianity and your biblical viewpoint.
Yeah, and you brought up COVID, which kind of brings me into my next question, because during that time, we heard the sentiment a lot about how it's important to have compassion and love for others. And of course, that was used to try to convince people to take the vaccine at the time. And whether or not you agree with the vaccine, that's a separate issue. But those two words, compassion and love, often were left undefined. And of course, as Christians, we know that God is love, and loving others is living out his principles. But how would you encourage Christians to remain compassionate without compromising their convictions?
Well, I think Christians definitely need to know what their convictions are. And I know that sounds really simple, but I think a lot of times Christians may understand what they believe, but don't actually know why. They can't point to the biblical passages that justify what they believe. And even more so, they are really just repeating what they've heard other people say. And I think it's very important to have those things like in your heart, to understand them fully and fundamentally, so that you can explain those things to people, explain why you believe what you believe about a vaccine, for example, abortion, same-sex marriage, any of these things. You need to have those answers in your mind ready to go. And I think ultimately this idea of the culture using compassion is really just a way to deceive you and to make you feel shame for having a biblical point of view. And we're the ones who should be feeling proud of what we believe. The faith that we have in Christ is something that we should be shouting from the rooftops. The Bible says the righteous are as bold as a lion. And I think that's one of my life passages. And I think it's important that Christians become that we become bold and we become clear about what we believe and why.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great goal to have. And something else I want to ask you about is some of these executive orders that President Trump is signing that have to do with DEI initiatives, which we've seen implemented in businesses and children's classrooms across the country, along with things like critical race theory. How should Christians respond to these specific things?
Critical race theory and other sort of DEI initiatives, these things are just obsessed with race. And, God tells us that he is not concerned with how you look on the outside. He's concerned with who you are on the inside. And I think that's how we should be as well. I don't understand this turn in the culture to focus on race, focus on sex, focus on these characteristics that don't really tell you who someone is inside and what their morals are and what their values are and whether they have integrity. And we really need to shift back to a merits-based approach. Is this biblical? Well, yes, because as I mentioned before, even when God is calling David to become king to replace Saul, he says that man looks at the outward appearance, but God looks at the heart. And I think all Christians should be focused on any, say, elected official or anything like that. Anyone you're looking at, who you're going to vote for, you should be focused on what that person is like in terms of their integrity and also their biblical point of view. How are they going to run the country or the city or state or whatever they're called to govern? And are they going to do that in a way that honors God's principles as opposed to in a way that honors the world? And so you can't do that just by looking at someone.
And you talk about all of these things in your book. So where can people find it to learn more about all of these things?
So my book is available on Amazon right now, Uncommon Courage, Defending Truth and Freedom While There Is Still Time. There's also a great book trailer attached to that. If you go to Amazon and look right now, you'll see, and there's a video there where I explain even in more depth than I'm doing now about what you are going to get by reading this book.
I appreciate that conversation very much, Madison. And that's going to leave us with time on the podcast today on this Monday for one last thing. And we're going to take a look at 1 Corinthians 10:31. So whether you eat or drink or whatever you do, do all to the glory of God. And that's one reason, Bill, you'll see a lot on CBN News stories where people in different spheres, like whether it's sports or entertainment or Hollywood or whatever, praising God first and foremost in what they're doing. And it's just a reminder of how we should, wherever we are in our neck of the woods, in our job and what we're doing, do it all to the glory of God, no matter how large or small the task.
Yeah, it's an important reminder, even when we think something is not a big deal or it's menial, why are we doing this, that we need to honor God in everything, the big and the small.
Yeah, because I mean, you just never know how he's going to draw someone to himself through something small unit that you would never think of. So good spot to leave it. Good thought there on this Monday as we kick off our work week, and we'll do it all for the glory of God. Amen to that. Lord willing, and that creek don't rise on us. We'll be back tomorrow with more, and have a great rest of your Monday. God bless.